Welcome, and thank you for listening to Sandy Creek Stirrings. I'm your host, Joshua Jimenez.
And if you're going to win souls, you've got to love souls. In spite of their meanness, in spite of the way they look, in spite of everything, you've got to seek to bring souls to Jesus Christ because you love them, because Jesus loved them, and because Jesus died for them, and you're trying to bring them to the Son of God.
The Bible says in Psalm 84:11, my last verse, "For the Lord God is a sun and shield. The Lord will give grace and glory. No good thing will he withhold from them that walk uprightly." I've based my whole life on that it pays to serve God, and I believe that with all my heart.
God has given us a guidebook. God has given us a directional map. And that guidebook, that map, is the precious Word of God.
Listen, don't just go and sit in the pew. Find some way to serve, and serve as a family. Be a part of everything at church. And when you learn to love what God loves, your children will learn to love it as well.
Homes are not that spiritually strong. We're getting overtaken by the world quickly, but unfortunately, we're pumping all the sewage in. We're letting the world in when that ought to be a haven.
Today we are continuing My Story Won't Wow You. It's just a journey through some things that I've learned, some things in my life, and some things that I've gone through that I hope that you can learn from as well. We can learn something from anybody, whether it's how to not do something or how to do something. There are lessons to learn, and there are lessons that if you share your life story, it will help your children, it will help your coworkers, it'll help your family. But the most important story you can share is the one about how you came to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. That time where you asked Jesus Christ into your heart to save you. That's the most important story. It's your testimony, and your testimony is your number one evangelism tool you have to share the gospel with other people. Now, in my story, I was saved when I was 3.5 years old in Carthage, Missouri, and it was there in my bedroom late at night. I went ahead and I knelt down by my bed and I asked Jesus Christ to come into my heart and save me. That was the most wonderful decision I ever made. And let me tell you something, I am so happy that I got saved at a young age. You need to be sharing your testimony with other people, and I want this series to encourage you to do just that, to share your testimony with other people. Now, some have asked where the title came from, My Story Won't Wow You, and the reason I put that as kind of the title for this series is I don't have one of those stories where I grew up on the streets, or I was a drug addict, or I struggled with alcohol. I don't have those stories. I grew up in a wonderful Christian home. I was able to be protected from a lot of those things. And so in many regards, my story won't wow you, but I don't want that to stop me or to stop you from sharing your testimony with other people. Now, I'm not going to go back and review everything we've talked about up to this point in time, but I will give just briefly where we ended off last time in this series. Of course, this series is kind of sprinkled throughout our episodes. You'll never know when another one is going to be released, and so they're just kind of sprinkled about. So let me give you a little bit of what happened last time. My dad and I left our family here in Florida, and we finally flew over. Of course, we were missionaries. If you've been following along the story, you know a lot of my background story up to this point, but we flew out to the island that we had been working so hard to get to. We had completed language school, we were in the process of moving, and so we were moving out to the island of St. Bartholomew. Now, normally within these episodes, I give a lot of my personal stories, things that I've learned, funny things like that. Today, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to give you an insider's look at St. Bartholomew, or also known as St. Barths, B-A-R-T-H-S, St. Barths. And I wanted to give you a little bit of the history of that island, to give you a little bit of a look at what it would have been like to live on that island. And then what I'll do is next time we go into this story, I'll share a little bit more about my family, what it was like living on the island, some things in regards to myself personally. I'll give that in next week's episode, but I want to give you a good amount of information on the island today. And the reason I want to do that is because this is what we worked so hard to get to. Our whole goal and our whole vision for all those years was to get to St. Bartholomew. And so I want you to see what we were looking at and see the need for missionaries there on the field. Many people have never been able to travel to another country or a third world country, and so here's what I want today. I want you to put on your thinking cap. I want you to get into the imagination station and go with me, and I want you to envision these things in your mind and put yourself there on the island. Now, before we get into the rest of the content today, let me encourage you that if you've enjoyed Sandy Creek Stirrings, to give us a like on Facebook, to share this post, or maybe even to leave us a review, whether it be on Apple Podcast or Facebook, just to help other people be able to find the podcast as well. If you have any questions you'd like to send in, you can send those in and email them at joshua@sandycreekstirrings.com. Email them to joshua@sandycreekstirrings.com, or you can send that in on our website, sandycreekstirrings.com, and you go to the contact page. Now, let's dive into the content for today. St. Bartholomew, when you think of an island, I don't know what you think of, but St. Bartholomew was 8.5 square miles in size. 8 square miles in size. It was a super small island. Think about 8 square miles, 8.5 square miles in size. It's just a really small island, and it's owned by France. Now, it was originally discovered by, if I'm remembering my facts correctly, it's been so long since I've talked about this, but it was discovered by Christopher Columbus on one of his journeys over. I believe it was his second journey over, if I remember correctly, and found no water on the island and named it after his brother, Bartholomew, and great, naming it, no water, you can't survive on the island, and so they named it after his brother. Anyway, but it's an absolutely gorgeous island, just a great place. It's got beautiful beaches. It's blue. I mean, clear pool water for the sea. I mean, it is clear, and you can envision it in your mind. You're not envisioning it clear enough, and how beautiful the water is there. It's amazing. So the snorkeling there was absolutely tremendous, and we would go to the beach early in the morning, and before everybody was awake and before the drunks got around, and we would go early in the morning, and we'd go snorkeling, we'd go swimming, and there'd be nobody on the beach, and we'd have it all to ourselves, and it was just a phenomenal thing. But really enjoyed the snorkeling, got to snorkel around the reefs there, and got to see all kinds of different animals, whether it be sea turtles. Got to swim with the sea turtles in the wild. Got to swim around, see the tropical fish and sharks, and those are some stories for some other times, but just great snorkeling. We enjoyed a lot of different things on the island. There were some trails that you could hike on around the beaches, and you could hike on those. There was wild goats on the island, and they were just running all over the place, and so there was wild goats. It was really an incredibly safe island. And of course, you committed a crime, there was nowhere to go. It was 8.5 square miles, and they were going to get you. They were going to find you. So it was a very safe island to be on. You could walk around really with no fear, to an extent of being mugged or being murdered or anything like that. So it was a really safe island. They use the euro. Now, as far as the exchange rate on the euro right now, the exchange rate is right at about 1.22 from what I just looked up. And basically, you're looking at, if you want 100 euros, you're going to have to pay out $122, 121, and And it's basically, the euro is worth a lot more than the dollar right now. And so we had to account for that on our monthly support, account for the exchange rate, exchanging money over to the euro. We would lose a fair amount every single month exchanging it over to the euro. Now, on the island, as I said, no fresh water on the island, and so nothing is truly produced on the island. Everything, fruits, vegetables, everything has to be imported. It's brought in on the ships, and so if you want something ordered, it's going to take a little bit to get there because it has to be imported. And so because of the importation of everything was super expensive. Super expensive. So like if you went into, right now, if you go into Walmart or Winn-Dixie, I think a gallon of milk is hovering around, what is it, $2.89, $3, something like that. And but if you wanted a fresh gallon of milk, like, you know, the kind you buy in Walmart, if you wanted a fresh gallon of milk on St. Barths, you were looking at $16 a gallon. Yeah, you heard me right. $16 a gallon. And so we drank the nasty box stuff that you would keep on the pantry shelf, and that stuff is just no good. So we won't even go there, but that's just disgusting. And but we didn't have milk that often. Gas was, I believe, when we were on the island, around $20 a gallon. And now, obviously, the island was only 8.5 square miles. You're not using a ton of gas, but still $20 a gallon. And so all of that because of the importation, because there's no fresh water on the island. And so some may be wondering, well, how would you get water? How would you drink? How would you shower? How would you do all those things? And so basically, they'd use rainwater. And much like the olden days, they would gather that rainwater off the roofs, and it goes down into the gutters and feeds down into a big tank, typically directly under your house, called a cistern. And the home that we lived in, the cistern was directly under our living room, dining room, kitchen area. We lived in a 800-square-foot home. All 8 of us lived in that 800-square-foot home. And under 800 square foot, that is. But then there was it was all tile, but there were 4 tiles over in the corner of the dining room. And you could go over there, and there was a little ring, and you could pull up that ring. It was really heavy because of the cement, and you could pull it up, and you could look down in the cistern, and that's what you drank from. That's what you showered in. That's what you did. Anything you needed fresh water for, you got it from your cistern, and you could take a flashlight and shine it down in there, and there were cockroaches and spiders and all kinds of things crawling around in your cistern. Kind of gross to think about, but you used rainwater. That was the only fresh water they had, and they only had started using, I think you pronounce it desalination, where they take the salt out of salt water on the island, and they've only had that for maybe 20 to 30 years. And so there was no fresh water. You had to use cisterns. They started using the process of desalination, and you could order a truck of water and have it delivered to your house. They would pump it into your cistern, and a truck of water, I don't remember for sure. I think it was like $260 for a truck of water, if I remember correctly. Now you're thinking like, big truck. Remember, this is an 8.5 square mile island. The roads were super narrow. And we'll talk about that in a second. But these trucks were like the little Isuzu trucks you see on golf courses. They were really, really tiny, and you were paying a whole lot of money for just a little bit of water. And so no fresh water, so they don't export anything. They really only import things. So their industry for the commoners is tourism. That's what their industry relies on. So people will make and sell handmade items. They'll do all kinds of things. I remember my uncle, he would make little replicas of the houses on the islands. If you look up St. Bartholomew and look up houses, you'll see these old style houses on there. They're yellow and they've got red roofs, or they're blue and they've got red roofs, and just an old island house. And so he'd make replicas of those, and he would sell them to the tourist. And tourism is their industry. There's a lot of fishermen on the island. They bring in their catch, but really, I found when we were there, most people thought, wow, you got to eat fish all the time. Really within our house, we didn't eat a whole lot of fish. And it was actually kind of expensive. I don't know why. But we would typically, if we ate meat, we would eat more chicken, small pieces of meat, little pieces of beef, but mainly like frozen chicken wings, things of that sort that were brought in. Those are the types of meats that we would get to eat. And so because everything was so expensive. In fact, some might be embarrassed about this, but when we would go into the grocery store there on the island, we would go in and go to the meat counter. And over near the side of the meat counter, in this really small grocery store, they would have these little packages of just beef cuts. And just small end pieces and just little cut-up pieces of beef, and they were little chunks of beef, that like you might throw in beef stew or something like that. And they were, in French, what would be directly translated over to English would be called animal meat. And no, it wasn't just meat of random animals. It was what the rich people would feed their dogs. And so we found that the beef was super cheap if you bought the animal meat, and it was just as good. So we were eating what people were feeding their dogs, but we were having a great time, and we made it work. They eat lots and lots of bread. And so every single day, the typical islander will go to the bakery, and he will buy the baguettes for the day, and he'll buy whatever pastries or whatever they're going to eat. Typically, it's just a baguette or two. And because at the end of the day, that French bread, what you buy in Walmart, what you buy in Winn-Dixie, which, by the way, is nothing like authentic French bread. But you go and you buy French bread, a baguette, and they would buy it there on the island every single morning. And you say, why? Because at the end of the day, it was as hard as a baseball bat. You could go and you could hit baseballs with it. It was so hard, it was inedible the next day. And so every morning they would go and they would buy their bread. And oh, man, if I could find anybody who could make a baguette like we got there on the island, I would pay them lots and lots of money. And just so amazing. You would get that fresh bread in the morning, and it'd be hot, and it'd be just buttery soft because of all the butter I'd put on it. And you'd slice up some cheddar cheese and put it, oh my goodness, are you hungry? Because I'm hungry. And but they eat lots of bread, and their diet really consisted of bread, and then mainly a lot of soups. Lots and lots of soups. They would put all kind of starches in there to make it as filling as possible. So they'd put potatoes, rice, noodles, all in the same soup, and then whatever meat was available. And whether it was chicken wings, whether it was little pieces of beef, whether it was pig snout, whether it was bull's foot, whether it was whatever it may be, they would put into that soup. Sometimes they would catch a wild goat and they would cut it up, and you'd have wild goat in the soup. Sometimes you would have goat intestines in the soup. And so, yes, all those things had pig snout soup a ton of times. Why, I don't know, but we ate it all the time because a lot of people, they love that. I don't know why. And but it was soup. Soup was their big thing. You say, why? Because it could stretch a lot. They could make a really big pot of soup, and it would last them a day or two, maybe 3 days if they, kept it in the fridge, blah, blah, blah. And, but they would keep that soup and would make it stretch so they could take a little bit of ingredients and make it stretch a while. So you would have a handful of chicken wings, and they would fry them up, and it smells so good, and you just wanted some fried chicken. And then they throw it in the soup, and it'd get all soggy. And but they were making it all stretch, and so they eat a lot of soups. I wasn't a huge fan, and but that's just me. Maybe it's right up your alley, but I'm not a huge soup fan. Soup for me is an appetizer. It's not a meal. It's kind of why I'm not a Panera Bread fan. It's like you get a soup and a half a sandwich, and you pay like you got a full sub. And but anyway, soup. So I wasn't a huge fan, especially since it was so hot, and you're eating hot soup. But needless to say, we got through, we survived, amen. And so breads, fish, soups, and things like that. But they drink lots of Coke. Coke is pretty prominent on the island. Drink lots of Perrier, which is like a carbonated water or soda water, I guess you call it. They drink lots of Malta. Maybe you've seen a Malta in the store before. And Malta, it comes in a bottle that, I'll be honest, looks like a beer bottle. It is non-fermented. It's not alcoholic. I love Malta. I don't know really anybody else besides my dad, and I think one or two of my brothers, and couple other guys I know here that like Malta, but most people I know hate it. They think it is disgusting, but there's something for you to try sometime, and they sell it in cans now. So I can actually buy it because I won't go in the store and buy something that looks like a beer, and I don't want to give anybody the wrong opinion. And so somebody brought me a can of Malta the other day, and so now I can buy it. And so I have to buy some canned Malta, but over there in the islands, it was a super common thing, and they would drink Malta. They would drink canned Lipton tea was another big thing as well. So drinking, though, as far as alcohol, that is incredibly prominent on the island. Drunks are all over the place, and people who are lifelong drunks, just all over. Drinking has a really big stronghold on the island. I remember when we would travel around to churches and we would show our video, that missionaries will show a video. We had a video, and one of those pictures, my dad talked about the alcoholism on the island. And there was a picture of the beer bottles, just mounds and mounds and mounds of beer bottles. And so lots of alcohol and drinking. Part of that has to do with the islands. Another part of that has to do with it being France. And both of those cultures tend to lean towards drinking and that type of lifestyle. And so just a severe problem down there on the island is alcoholic beverages. And boy, that island could be turned completely around if they would get rid of alcohol. And so the common people on the island are poor. The island has been known to be called the playground of the rich and famous. They'll take their yachts there. They have big, villas that they'll stay in, but the common people are just poor. They've got a small, under 800 square foot home typically, and they just live by whatever means they have. They live in small houses that typically have, that don't have any windows. They'll have shutters, but a lot of the people don't even have windows. Typically, they don't have screens. Typically, their doors are just open all day to try and let whatever breeze come through that can to at least move the air. But mosquitoes, you would sit in people's houses and mosquitoes would eat you alive. They would eat you for lunch. And because no screens, and they would keep their doors open and really no windows, they would just shutter them at night and they would just lock them together. And that's the way they lived. And the hospital was the same way when we first arrived. When we first arrived to the island, the hospital was open windows, no screens, and everything was basically outdoors. The hallways were outdoors. And so when we first arrived, that's the way the hospital was. It also served as the nursing home. And but I remember the first or second night my dad and I got there before everybody else to start setting everything up. We went and visited one of my, I think he'd be great uncles, and he was in the hospital. And we went and visited him, and he was just covered head to toe in mosquitoes, because that's the way it was. Everything was open. Now, since our arrival in 2011, they have changed up the hospital. They have put windows in. They have put doors on the doorways. And so it's changed a little bit. But that's the way the island was. Everything's open. Of course, not a whole lot of theft. As I mentioned earlier, a very safe island. And so during our time on deputation, though, as far as the kids go on the island, they would have to send their kids to another island for the last few grades of high school. And you could only go so far on St. Barths, and then you would have to send your kids off to finish off high school. I think they may have changed that now. I'm not completely sure. Now, on the island, there was no fast food. Even in some third world countries, you're going to find a McDonald's or a Burger King or a KFC or a Pizza Hut or something like that. St. Barths had none of those. It had no McDonald's, no Wendy's, no Burger King, no nothing. There was no fast food on the island, period. No amusement parks, and relatively, besides nature and things of that sort, beaches and hiking and swimming and those type of things, there was really nothing to do on the island. And that's just the way it was. I'm not trying to be mean, but there was relatively nothing to do on the island outside of what people would come to the island for, tourism and tourist attractions and things of that sort. And so that's the way the island was. The people were heavily involved and ingrained with Catholicism. Catholicism was the mainstream religion and had been since its history. And as far as history could tell us, there had been no true gospel witness on the island until we arrived there. As far as we could tell in history, nobody had ever preached the gospel on that island. And so Catholicism, what was everybody claimed to be? They were all Catholics. That's what they claimed to be. And that's really what the people live by. They live by their Catholic beliefs. They live by just worshiping Mary and all those different things, and eventually we'll have an episode on Catholicism within our 5 Things Wrong With series. And but that's the way they were. They were so ingrained in Catholicism, and just to push it even further, Jehovah's Witnesses had arrived on the island a few years before we had gotten there. And one of the first new, quote-unquote, religions to the island, and Jehovah's Witnesses were there, took offerings, did all those kind of things, and then one night disappeared with all the money. And that left a severely bad taste in the mouth of the people for other religions. And so, in fact, when we arrived, they were told that people like us were a cult, and we were just after their money, and we were just after those type of things. And so it was very difficult to get them to change their hearts. God definitely had to work on them because they were so used to Catholicism, and that's what they relied on. It was just, I'm a Catholic, so I'm going to go to heaven. And sadly, that won't get you to heaven. That just won't get you to heaven. And so that's the way the island was, deeply ingrained in Catholicism, very superstitious people. And lots of different superstitions. If you saw a grasshopper, they told you that you're going to get some money in the mail. They told you that my mom, she was pregnant with my little brother, and you went into a house on the island, and somebody ran around the house, and they turned pictures that were hanging on the wall. They turned them around because the picture of the man had a mental disorder. He was dead at that point, but he had a mental disorder when he was alive, and they believed that if a pregnant woman looked at the picture of a dead person who had a mental disorder, that that baby would then have a mental disorder when it was born. And just stuff like that, things you've never heard of before. Those were some things they believe. I remember one Christmas we had bought some different people some pocket knives. And, kind of common down in the South in America, you give guys a pocket knife. And so we bought pocket knives and we handed them to them, and they rejected them. They said, no, we cannot take this, because if you give somebody a knife as a gift, any kind of knife, if you give them a knife, then you're telling them you want to cut off the relationship. And we did not know that, and so what they would do is to counter this curse of the pocket knife, they would pay you for the pocket knife. And so basically we gave them a pocket knife, they gave us money. In the end, it kind of all worked out, but just things like that they believed. And so that's the way life was on St. Bartholomew. That's the way life was on the island. I wanted to give you some of those details in today's episode to kind of give you an insight of what we were walking into as a family. Now, what I'll do next time on My Story Won't Wow You is I will give you some things in regards to what we did. What was our day like? What did we do for groceries? How did we afford things? How did we get a car? And all those different things I'll be discussing in the next episode of My Story Won't Wow You. But here's the deal. I want you to realize something. There are people like you. They're a woman. They're a man. They're a boy. They're a girl. They're young. They're old. They're like you. They have a heart like you. They have a soul like you. They smile. They laugh. They go through hard times. But can I tell you this? We are blessed. We are blessed to live in America. You have most likely have AC in your home. Most of them on that island don't. You get to enjoy the pleasures of McDonald's and Burger King and things like that. Most of people on the island that are older have never seen a McDonald's. You are blessed. Never forget to thank God for the blessings that you and I so often take for granted. We go into our house at the end of a workday and it's right at the right temperature we want. That's a blessing. Yet how many times do we forget to thank God for it? Can I just remind you in today's episode, be thankful. Be thankful. Because there's other people in the world who would love to have just some of the simple pleasures that you are able to enjoy on a daily basis. So I'll give a little bit more details next time on My Story Won't Wow You. Until then, my friend, keep looking up and keep stirred up for the cause of Christ.